Back now with Endgame and the other two eyes of our Open today, and that's impeachment and Iowa. Yamiche, look, we don't know what the impeachment trial is, and as I remind people, we shouldn't even presume the outcome. I know a lot of people presumed last night's outcome of Baltimore and Tennessee, right, Mr. French? A big exactly. Tennessee Titan fan. So we're not going to presume any outcome. But the fact of the matter is, I'm going to put up these two polls in Iowa and New Hampshire here of the presidential race. Top four in Iowa. It's a bunched race. Look at that. The difference between first and fourth is 5 points. Margin of error stuff. Sanders, Warren, Buttigieg, Biden. Let's put up a New Hampshire poll that came out this week. Literally almost the same percentage numbers closely, just a slightly different order, but margin of error in both places. Two of those four candidates are sitting U.S. senators. The Clinton trial took 37 days from start to finish. We are 22 days away from Iowa. At this point, it looks like we're going to have a Senate trial during Iowa and New Hampshire. Now what?
And if you're in the margin of error and you're looking at what might make the difference in that small thing, it might be that you had longer times to sit in the living rooms of Iowans, which is what most people think it takes to win Iowa. So if Senator Sanders and Senator Warren are taken out of that, of course they're going to be in some ways worried about that. But when I talk to aides for both of those people, when I talk to aides for Joe Biden, they're also making this point that they're really making this idea that it's going to be about who feels for them, who it's going to be an emotional connection to them. It's not going to just be that you were Bernie Sanders was the last person to stop by your firehouse or your elementary school. And the people that, when I talk to Bernie Sanders' campaign, they make this point that he has fiercely loyal support. And I've someone who's covered 2016 and Bernie Sanders and then President Trump. I think what they have in common, at least what their supporters have in common, that there's really a visceral connection to their candidate there. Right. So when I look at who could possibly be the person who is possibly favored here, Bernie Sanders, I think, could be somebody who could sit out as part of this and still retain his support in a way that maybe Warren wouldn't.
Steve, what I'm trying to get people to visualize here is we're going to have 2 weeks of this Senate trial, and that's the backdrop for Iowa. Yeah. And I think we don't fully comprehend how that is going to impact things.
We don't. I guess there'll be a lot of breakfast meetings for candidates in Iowa and going back to Washington in the afternoon.
You think they'll plane pool? I'm hoping they should plane pool, right?
The private jet or something.
Don't believe that.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right that someone like Sanders, someone like Warren, they're brand names. They are known by the people who are going to support them, and it may not affect them that much. The media environment is affected, but I'm not sure that we fully understand that. This Senate trial could be quite dramatic, but could also be quite boring. And we don't really, I'm just being honest, and I'm interested as a citizen. Yes. I don't know if TV networks are going to be that interested or if they're going to find things more dramatic in Iowa. We just don't know how that's going to play out.
I think also the foreign policy issues, which haven't at all risen to the top of the debate, are going to give, I think, Bernie some advantages. Having campaigned against the Iraq War and now taking on Biden, let's see how these coming debates go, because I think that Bernie versus Biden on the war and peace issue is going to be a subtext. Iowa has always cared about that.
And they can be kind of dovish. You know, David, the other thing that I'm interested in here is that, let's say this Tuesday night debate is basically framed as Biden versus Bernie on war and peace. You have Buttigieg and Warren and Klobuchar, who are, and I think Klobuchar's on that, she's in the middle of almost top tier, almost second tier, right? Her own tier. They could get swallowed up by that debate, and it just becomes Biden-Bernie.
Oh, it could absolutely be Biden-Bernie, but I tell you, don't sleep on Buttigieg in that scenario. He served. He's been in Afghanistan.
How important is that to you? I've always been curious, but to other people who have served, how important is it that he wore that uniform too?
I think it's important, but it's not close to dispositive.
Okay.
It's the kind of thing where, when a politician says, I've been to Afghanistan 6 times, well, you've been on a guided tour. Mm-hmm. You've seen what people have wanted you to see. When you've had boots on the ground, it's a transformational experience. It was for me. It was transformational. It changed the way I viewed many things about the Iraq War in the Middle East. And so I think having that experience and being the only one who can bring it to the stage is going to be important. And he's shown an ability in these debates to stand up for himself in a way that perhaps people didn't anticipate.
Go ahead.
Biden aides say that they think that he is really playing to his strengths when he's talking about foreign policy, when he's talking about the Middle East. But I think there are a lot of people who still remember the report from Washington Post saying that the Obama administration, along with other administrations, were not forthcoming with how the Afghanistan war went. And then you saw Bernie Sanders at the last debate say he was wrong for supporting the Afghanistan war. So I think that gives, in some ways, a lane for Buttigieg and Warren.
Andrea, think about this stat that I like to remind people. John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama are the last 3 Democratic nominees. 2 voted for the Iraq War, 1 didn't. Which one won the presidency and which two lost?
That was what I was saying exactly about Bernie. Barack Obama was, the senator from Illinois, the Illinois state senator who came out against the Iraq War, and that is what really propelled him in Iowa, and Iowa propelled him through the next primaries to come. I do think that, however boring, quote unquote, without witnesses perhaps, opening statements, the impeachment trial is, I think it is going to consume the media environment. The networks are going to be wall to wall, and it's going to be very hard for this 2020 race to get enough focus.
Yeah, there's also other parts of the 2020 campaign that matter in this impeachment trial. Republican senators who have, what would you do if you were Cory Gardner? David?
Look, the bottom line is, and I don't think people truly appreciate the situation these Republican senators are often in, because if they say, I'm open to impeachment, I want to hear from John Bolton, a lot of people in their base that might be motivated to turn them out of office in a primary get really angry. Yeah. But then if they don't say this very common sense thing, which is, I want to hear from available witnesses, like the national security advisor at the time.
Seems pretty reasonable.
Then in the general election, you have people who are, on the fence who say, this guy, he's just in the tank for Trump. I'm not electing an independent thinker at all.
John Bolton was really the game changer on that.
Steve Inskeep, Mitch McConnell, is he prioritizing protecting Trump with this impeachment trial or that Senate majority?
Senate majority, although he certainly supports the president, supports his party, believes, I think, that he's doing it within the traditions of the Senate, even though people looking at him from the outside would see it differently.
All I will say is 37 days. If it really is 37 days, it means we go to the Nevada caucuses before we have the impeachment trial behind us anyway.
Incredible.
Thank you, guys. Hello from Washington. I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for checking out the Meet the Press channel on YouTube. Click on the button down here to subscribe and click over here to watch the latest interviews, highlights, and other digital exclusives.